Hi, I'm Jeff Chaumé, and today I'm going to add undo to my narrative engine. This is the narrative engine that I've been working on, and I have added this little rollback button, which doesn't do anything at all right now. But what I want it to do is, as I am going through the story and every time I interact with something, it changes the story state. I want to be able to click on one of these rollbacks and just undo all the way back to whichever one of them I click on and reset the state to wherever that was. So that's what we're going to implement. Now, undo is typically difficult in programming, but using a technique called event sourcing, it makes it pretty simple. This is how I currently have my state. The main model holds a story state, and the story state has all the information needed for what you just saw on the screen, the list of known locations, the storyline that stacks up, etc. So one way of doing undo would be every time we have an interaction to just store a list of these modified story states. But that would be taking up a lot of memory, and so there's a better way we can do that. Now I want to show you that I have a update function. The update function, if there is an interaction, is going to take the story state that I currently have, and it takes the interaction that was the user did, and it runs that through this sort of update function for the story state. And this update function just looks at what the interaction was, and based on that, it'll do a bunch of changes to the state, add a location, or whatever makes sense. So we can reuse that, you'll see in a moment. But for now, what I'm going to do is, instead of tracking the entire story state and changing that with that update function every single time, we're just going to leave the story state alone. We'll have a starting state, and instead we'll track the interactions that the user takes. Now, I sort of cheated, and I've already done all the work, so I'm going to pull in the pieces that are appropriate, and that way you don't have to watch me fumble around trying to figure it all out. So let's start off by defining a new type, and that new type, here's the cheating part. The new type is a story history type, and it's a record that has a list of interactions, and an interaction is just takes something that the user interacts with, and we also have a starting state. So this will be our new main piece of state that we accumulate over the course of the game, is just a story history with more and more interactions. So now we need to go to the story where we define an init function. And our init, instead of just storing the story state and setting up the whole world to store as the starting state, we are going to replace that with a history. And our history starts off with an empty list of interactions because we haven't done anything yet, and the starting state is what you saw there originally, the setup. Now that we have the init, we need to jump down to the undo, the update. In the update, instead of running our story state through that story updater every single time, all that we need to do I'm going to update I need to update my model as well. So what I've done, this part I'm not ready for yet. What I've done is I've added, instead of updating that story, I update the story history. And in that story history, whenever there's an interaction, all I do is append it to the end of the existing interactions. And so that means that every time we make a change, we will be building up this list of interactions, but we're not actually doing anything with them in the story yet. So let's go down to our view. And our view, the main view is the game page, and the game page gets past a story state. Now, the story state doesn't exist anymore, so we could give it a story history, but it doesn't know what to do with the story history. So here's where the key part comes. We have a list of interactions, and we have a starting point, and so whenever we need the current version of the story state, all that we do is run that list of interactions that we've accumulated, just loop through those, and use that story update function that I showed you originally, and we just accumulate and build up the story from the starting state with each of the interactions that we were given. And that will build up a story whenever we need it. So I will do that. All that I've changed here is that I am doing a build story state, and I'm passing in the history. So this build story state doesn't exist yet. I'm going to go put that in over in this file. This was that original step that I mentioned, and so the build story state is very simple. The build story state takes the starting state, and it takes a list of interactions, and it's just going to fold from that starting state, fold over the interactions using this function that we used before that does the updates. And I just had to make sure that the types still matched, but we're getting an interactable each time. And the update function works exactly the same as it always did. It's just that we're building it up from all of our history on demand at once instead of just once every time we run the update function. So where does that leave us? Do we compile? We do. So I'm going to restart this. This should look the way it did before. Let's see. We can go click around. You can see that this is basically exactly what we had before. The rollbacks still don't do anything. It doesn't look like we've changed anything, but behind the scenes, this is a whole new model that's representing this. We no longer have a concept of a current story state. We just have that list of interactions and a starting state, and that's all the data that we're storing, and we're able to rebuild this. So every single time I click something new, it's running through all of my existing history of interactions, and it is figuring out what the exact story state should be from that. Now that's not necessarily the most performant. It might be necessary to cache the current story state, and if we do an undo to invalidate that cache. But so far I've found that even with hundreds and hundreds of interactions, it's instantaneous. So if we need to make it perform better, I'll do that when the time comes. For now, everything looks good. All we have to do is implement this rollback functionality. So let's go look at that. I'll go back to my types, and I want to add a new message. Oh, sorry. My new message is just a rollback. A rollback takes an int, which is going to be basically how far back we want to go. And now we need to handle that rollback in our update. So I will jump ahead into the story, and I think the only thing left is this little piece right here. So handling the rollback, this is the undo part of this, and this is as simple as just taking our interactions, that list that we have, and we just take the first however many up to where that rollback was set to, and then we just set it there. We basically just drop off whatever the interactions are that we wanted to undo. And now we have a new version of history, and everything else will function the same, and it will just build the story up to that, whatever our new version, our truncated version of the history is. And so the last thing that we need to do in order to actually use that, this is the view for the that makes those storylines, and this right here is what puts that little rollback button there. So all that we need is to put a click handler. Whenever I click this rollback, it's going to fire that rollback action, and we give it the index where it's at. And now let's go take a look at the story. I'm going to reset the whole thing. We'll do the same thing. We'll go to the garden. We'll take a look at Harry. Harry makes us follow him to the marsh. We'll take the marble, and we'll go back home. We'll look at the marble, and then maybe we realize, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I want to go back to here, back to before I went into the marsh with Harry. And so I can just click that. Uh-oh, nothing happened. Well, why did nothing happen? Let's try again. Maybe it didn't completely compile. There it goes. It just didn't compile by the time I refreshed it. So repeating that again, go to the garden, talk to Harry, take the marble, go back home, and realize, oh, you know what? I should have gone back here when I was in the garden. And if I click this one, there you go, undo, reset. And you can see not only did the storyline reset, but where we were, the known locations, Harry, all of that has been reset. And that is undo in Elm. Thank you.